It's a big honor to be invited again to CEEMAN, and I'm particularly pleased to be invited to Georgia at Tbilisi for the first time in my life. It's looking forward to hospitality, the reputed hospitality of the Georgian people. I don't like to be called legion because most legions are dead, but nevertheless.
A live legion.
And it's a very tough act to follow, Mr. Lehman here, about emerging markets and changing business landscape. And my answer to both is yes. We have emerging markets, and we have changing business landscape very rapidly, as we have seen it, and very dramatically sometimes. Because we are in the global market, and this market is constantly changing, growing, developing very rapidly. But one point in it, we don't have, it was mentioned at the end, we don't have global governance. There's nobody to regulate these markets. The financial crisis was the best example. Nobody knew what to do. It was a big cacophony what to do, and G20 made a weak attempt to do some regulation. But what, a year or two later, financial markets are exploding again, and nobody knows how to control them. The global GDP is around 60 billion, and the annual transactions are about 600 billion. So who is controlling what? Now, we shouldn't be afraid of this globalization, but the question is how do we manage it, and how do we manage in the different levels which are influencing our global goals. And our global goals, I think, should be two: the well-being of the people and societies and the safety. And so far, we're doing rather poorly on that, because we have on one side very rich countries, and we have on the other side still a number of very poor countries. The difference between the richest, Luxembourg, and the poorest, I just think Burundi, in GDP per capita is 1 to 600. How can this be in the 21st century? Even if you look at some other countries, in my whole country, Yugoslavia, after the breakdown of it, the difference between Slovenia as the most developed and Bosnia and the less developed is 1 to 6. In ex-USSR, the difference between Estonia and Tajikistan is 1 to 20 within 20 years. There's obviously something wrong with all that. And this can be a big potential danger in the future if we don't think about it, how to manage these disparities and what has to be done in the constantly changing business environment and in the different markets which are emerging. So, Mr. Lehman already mentioned there were some, he said seismic, I said tectonic changes over the last 20 years particularly. I see three major events. One was the fall of communism, disparition of Comecon, of Soviet Union or Yugoslavia. The next one was 9/11, which started the futile war with the terrorism, and it also means the beginning, the erosion of the US as a superpower. And the third one was the financial crisis 4 years ago, which led to the real economic crisis, and it's still having its repercussions. But these are events we all know about. Below it are these fundamental trends. Globalization is one of them. It's driven by opening of the markets, and it's driven by the technological revolution, which is, technology is now available to everyone. And you can do leapfrogging, and Chinese, which was mentioned before, is a good example of this technological leapfrogging. So they are, out of this opportunity, this also means that we have other, beyond this globalization, we have other very important trends. There's a shift in political economic power away from USA as a superpower toward the new power centers like China and some others. Environmental issues are not clarified. We have increasing resource scarcity. Water might become a big battleground of the future. We have heard about demography, aging Europe, aging Japan, but not aging Africa or Asia or even America. What's also worried is this growing social gap and poverty. If we don't do something about it, we might have, even in developed countries, big unrests, as you can see recently in some countries like Greece or Spain. And we need to deal with the challenges of the future, new skills, and I also think we need new aspirations and new values. Because some of the old values which were characterized for whatever world we had before have been eroding. And greed was one of the negative values which was driving the financial markets maybe to where they ended. So if you talk now about the emerging market, for me, it's a definition issue. I fully agree with Mr. Lehman. You know, we have emerging markets and we have submerging markets. In the past, you know, emerging markets had kind of second-class connotation to it. You know, we have developed markets and they are emerging or developing countries. Now, developed means also stagnant, because what do? You don't move ahead anymore because you are developed. Emerging or developing, you move ahead, you are dynamic. So which one do you prefer to be? And some of the old developed markets, as I said, are now submerging markets. Who wants to be in Greece today, or in Spain, or in Italy, potentially? Because these are the countries which kind of reached a peak of their performance and now kind of drifting down for whatever reasons are there, and the governments are desperately trying to stop this erosion. So we have a dilemma today, I think, that we have on one side rich but stagnating triad markets, we have seen it, and which still account for about more than half of the world GDP, but we see very fast-growing emerging markets which are catching up on all dimensions with the developed countries, and we have, therefore, a new balance of power. BRIC countries have been mentioned, but of those BRIC countries, Brazil and China are moving fastest. India is following Russia, unfortunately, despite its great potential, both natural resources and terrific people, is falling behind. And it's a question why. Why is the state capitalism of China performing better than whatever capitalism Russia has today? Because Russia 20 years ago was clearly ahead of China, and now it's falling behind. So these are questions which we should discuss, and are particularly relevant for this area of Central and Eastern Europe and the transition countries. So the question of emerging markets with the non-emerging or developed markets, I think, might be rethought in terms of definition. There's one definition by World Economic Forum, which has kind of three groups of countries: factor-driven, or efficiency-driven, or innovation-driven. And if you look at that classification, there are only 32 of 200 countries, whatever are there, are in innovation-driven area. These are mostly the developed countries. Efficiency-driven also 29, but a lot of them is factor-driven. So here is a question: how will we handle these countries to move from the factor-driven and efficient-driven to innovation-driven? Because innovation will be one of the elements of the future growth and future well-being of those countries. About the changing business landscape, I would just add a few things to what Professor Lehmann already said. First, I see the globalization is a big opportunity, if you look at it the right way and understand the rules of the game. Because you have opportunities to find new suppliers, you find new customers. Of course, you are meeting new competitors, but you can also meet new partners. Why don't we do more partnership on a global level? You have new challenges and new risks, and they have been mentioned. It's increased volatility, increased insecurity. So this has to be dealt with, and this results also, I think, in new imperatives, both on political level, on a business level, which have to work much closer in the future, much closer together in the future they have done so far. In many countries, there are countries which are notable exceptions, and those countries are really performing well. What I mean by these imperatives, one for me is competitiveness. I will come back to it, because today, in the globalist world, if you're not competitive, you're kind of sinking into average. And Mrs. Purk won't like it, but I'm always worried about my home country, Slovenia. I was invited recently to the president of Slovenia to talk about Slovenian economic strategy and policy, which we don't have, even after 20 years of our independence. And I said, I was invited to exactly the same room he invited me 7 years before my previous president. And at that time, the topic I should talk about was competitiveness, and what should Slovenia do? Move to the top or drift into average? At that time, we were number 31 in the world. And that was 7 years ago. Today, we're number 57. So we decided to go the second way, to drift into average. And this is a very dangerous attitude. So let's think about this, how to increase competitiveness in our country. And competitiveness leads to growth, to profitability, to the well-being of environment. Because without sound economy, you won't have a sound society, because you just cannot afford it in terms of what you need for the culture, for healthcare, for pensions, and so on and so on. The next one, of course, as mentioned before, is the reinvestment and sustainability. What are the sustainable strategy, not only at corporate level, sustainable strategies also on the state level. And there are states which are investing more in the future than some other, and if you look at them, they're also better positioned in competitive scale. And we should also at the end consider that these seismic or tectonic changes lead to something which I think Professor Gardelli from EMD last year presented to us in Bled, saying it's business as unusual. We have a completely different set of parameters and paradigms, and we have a saturated Western world, and we have a very hungry and developing world of developing countries. And it's a difference in consumer behavior between it's nice to have, I would like to have, I must have. And this drives the growth very usually. So competitiveness in this is for many countries becoming, and many companies, a very important element. If we look again globally, and I will touch what you said before, it's overall it's a global progress. The world is growing, the economy is growing, but there's, of course, the shifts from the west to the east, if you want, and I see it, and that's a message I would like to leave today. I see increasing risk for the transition countries, particularly Central Europe and Eastern Europe, and for the ex-Soviet Union countries, that we don't get our act together, that we will start falling behind. And we'll be not growing as fast, and our society will not develop as fast as it should. Because if you look at it, we have on the one side the block of rich yet stagnating triad countries, that was USA, Western Europe, and Japan. They are all in some troubles. We see in USA risk of jobless recovery or even new recession. In Europe, we have Euro troubles right now, and increasing split in the Euro between the Northern Europe, which is still performing reasonably well, and the Southern Europe, Greece, Spain, Italy, which is increasingly under pressure, and we don't like to have that. And we have all the Fukushima effects in Japan, which spill over even to Germany. Germany abandoned the nuclear power policy all of a sudden. How will they cope with the energy in the future? It can be a great opportunity for Germany if they develop those renewable sources of energy. It could be a great risk if they don't succeed. We talked about the fast growth of BRIC countries, and again I would say Russia here, to my knowledge, despite growing now 4%, again, is not growing as fast, and it's losing its competitive position compared to the other BRIC countries. Why? Because I just cannot understand it, knowing the Russian people and understanding what incredible resources you have in Russia. So one question for me would be, why don't we talk about Europe and the troubles also of Europe, and we talk about the partnership? Why the hell does not Russia join European Union? What's against it? Russia is half of Europe. Together with Ukraine and Belarus, it's 5 million square kilometers and about 300 million people or whatever. And why are not our political leaders not able to develop a European Union with Russia? Because then we would have an enormous block of not only of natural resources, but of people resources, very talented people, technology resources. This could be clearly a region which could be competitive with both America, North America, and China, because we must think in that dimension. We must think on global level, it's a global competition, but the next level for me is a mega level, and these are the big economic entities like NAFTA, like European Union, and so on. But European Union is reaching its end, and it's very split in itself. So what's our next vision in Europe? Then we have, of course, the fast, smaller, very competitive countries. A number of them were mentioned: Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Turkey, Taiwan, Vietnam is coming. These are the growing countries. There is a lot of growth there, and there are people who are still hungry and want to grow. And we come back to Central and Eastern Europe and these countries, we have a mixed picture. Some countries are doing reasonably well, like Poland, Czech Republic, or Estonia, but most of the other countries, including Russia, are lagging. You are not growing, not developing as fast, and we are not developing our competitiveness. And I mentioned before ex-Yugoslavian countries, the difference between Slovenia and Bosnia, 1 to 6, this is not tolerable. Why the hell did we did that to ourselves? And what did our political leadership do to break up a country and created a lot of small countries, which is fine for itself if we will be performing. But just saying we have independence and then say, okay, then the next step was to join Euro, and once we joined European Union, then we thought we arrived. No, then the work starts. And that was a mistake we did. So, I think you can also ask, when you start to think about why some countries are moving very fast and what are some underperforming, there might be very different reasons. It could be lack of coherent economic strategy. It could be lack of resources, be it natural resources, be it financial, be it people. It could be some subcritical mass. Some countries with just 1 to 2 million population, can they really survive? It could be lack of foreign direct investments because there are lacks of capital and lack of technology. And it could be, what's very important, summed together, lack of competitiveness. So if we look at this competitiveness, and we can argue about this analysis done by World Economic Forum, IMED, and some others we have heard about, are they right or not? I think they are an indicator, if you look over a period of time, how are certain countries progressing and how are not. I was asked one, what would be my ideal for Slovenia? I said, ideal would be a combination of Singapore and Denmark. Singapore's zest for performance and competitiveness, and then Denmark's zest for social justice. And this combination, why cannot we achieve it? But if you look at the countries, we see also a shift here. The top 10 countries in terms of competitiveness are still predominantly the Western developed countries, with some examples, exceptions like Singapore, who is number 2, or Hong Kong, who is number 10 or 11. But if you go to the top 20% of competitive countries, you see a clear shift to Asia and to South America. There's a lot of these countries there who are increasingly competitive. Malaysia is one of them. If you look at BRIC countries, China is the best position there, followed by India, Brazil, and Russia, unfortunately, at the end. Best in Central Eastern Europe is Czech Republic. Last is Bosnia and Herzegovina, number 102 last year. And in Eastern, if you take ex-Russia, Soviet Union, Estonia is now number 33, Kyrgyzstan is number 121. So big split, which means risk also for what we'll be looking forward for risk of potential social unrest in that level. So I think we should talk more about competitiveness also on the business school and on the CEEMAN level. I looked at the last 10 or 15 topics of CEEMAN, a lot about management development, a lot of very important topics, but never ever was a competitiveness as a key topic. At least I didn't find it. And competitiveness, to repeat again, if we want to be competitive on the global scale, we have 5 levels we can influence one way or another. One is the mega level, which I mentioned before. Big economic areas, European Union versus NAFTA versus CIS. But here I come back to my question, why cannot Russia and European Union join and create a super mega economic power, Eurasian power if you want? On macro level, there's individual states, and you have a broad range from Switzerland or Singapore as the most competitive to a number of Austrian countries which are not very competitive. Another important level we never talk enough about is the mezzo level, which could be sectors or regions within individual countries or clusters. And here are big differences, even in developed countries. Take Germany with the alte Bundesländer, neue Bundesländer. Still a gap, despite billions of investments which went into the ex-GDR. In France, you have a very striving Ile-de-France, and you have some regions which are less developed and develop less quickly than some others. The same for the sectors. There's no dying sectors, they're just dying companies. So the question is, which of those sectors in our individual countries can we push forward to become a real engines of our growth? Then we come to micro levels, and these are classical corporations. Corporations have to be competitive and sustainable, otherwise they will disappear. And you don't have to be from a big country to be a globally competitive player. Taking back my example of Denmark, Maersk, global leader in maritime shipping, Novo Nordisk, global leader in insulin, Arla, European leader in milk products. So it can be done even for the small countries. And then you have the hidden champions, the favorite of Dr. Purk, which are also very important in many countries we often neglect. And the last level is the nano level, the people, because people very often are our only resources. And do we develop our people well and fast enough? Because I think, and this is also the task of the management schools, to develop and contribute to development of the whole human relations chain, which I call from education and training, all the way from primary education to the training and cooperation, including the business schools, of course, innovativeness, not only innovation, innovativeness, productivity, entrepreneurship, topic which was raised by CEEMAN before, and the values, because we need clear competitive values. And if you look then, what is driving competitiveness in different countries, and what is the closest correlation? It's not that they say richness is competitiveness. Italy is rich but not competitive. Slovenia is rich but not competitive. The closest correlation I found was that those countries which are very competitive have also a very high degree of social cohesiveness, example, Scandinavian countries, and those countries who are also very competitive have value-oriented competitive value system. And here is a good example, Singapore. And for me, a new example, which I heard the other day, is Malaysia. In Slovenia, we had a seminar on the state-owned companies, and there was a presentation by a gentleman from Malaysia. He didn't talk about state-owned. He talked about government-linked companies. And the program they have was very impressive. And one key element was, he said, what's needed to move ahead is complete commitment of the government to the progress of society. Without that, it won't work. Then, of course, the business leaders have to do their own, and then, of course, management schools have to do their own. So my final word here would be, there's a lot of topics which are existing, and I think the business school and CEEMAN is doing an incredible job. If you just look at the progress over the last 20 years, from when we started the business school in Bled, as one of the first in Eastern Europe, and when I see CEEMAN today, this is a vast progress. But looking ahead, given the challenges, even more has to be done, and I would really like to focus also the discussion here and in the future on competitiveness and values. And here CEEMAN can contribute a lot, because you are educating the future generation of leaders, and we need better leaders. Thank you very much.